The sun had already fallen behind the red cliffs of Sage Hollow when the wind began to stir through the cottonwoods. Their silver leaves whispered like old secrets, brushing against the air heavy with dust and the faint smell of rain. Mira Weller sat on the porch of the ranch house her father had built, a faded shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The day's light had been long and golden, but evening brought an unease she couldn't name. Her hands, rough from years of work, trembled slightly as she watched the horizon where the desert met the sky. She was 30 now, though life had aged her faster. A woman of quiet grace and hard-earned strength, with lines etched around her eyes from sun and sorrow alike. People in town spoke kindly of her, the steady one, the healer. The woman who'd found peace in the arms of an Apache man named Talon. Talon was unlike any man she had ever known, proud, solemn, and fierce as the mountain storms. When he looked at her, it was as though the world fell away. He had saved her once from a band of drunken prospectors, and somehow their bond had grown from gratitude into something neither could explain. In a land divided by blood and prejudice, their love had been a defiance, a quiet rebellion against everything expected of them. But not everyone was glad. Behind the lace curtains of the parlor window, Alara, Myra's younger sister, watched her from the shadows. The lamplight caught the edges of her auburn hair and her pale, restless face. She was 22, beautiful in the way a wildfire is beautiful, untamed and dangerous. Her lips were pressed tight as she stared at Mira's figure outside. Alara had come home just a month ago after years away in Silver Creek, claiming she wanted to start fresh. But Mira had sensed the bitterness beneath her smiles. The question she didn't ask, the night she wandered the ranch alone. And when Talon had ridden up last week, tall and calm on his chestnut horse, Mira saw the way Alara's gaze followed him, hungry, desperate. Tonight, that hunger had curdled into something darker. Mira rose from the porch, brushing the dust from her dress, when she heard a faint creak behind her. She turned. Alara stood in the doorway, her blue eyes strange and bright in the twilight. "You're still waiting for him?" she asked softly. Mira smiled, unaware of the storm brewing beneath her sister's calm tone. "He'll come. He always does." Alara stepped closer, folding her arms. "You trust him too much. He's Apache, Mira. You know how people talk." Mira's smile faltered, but only slightly. People talk about everything they don't understand. Talon's heart is truer than most men I've known. Alara's jaw tightened. And what if he finds someone younger? Someone who could give him more than just peace? Myra blinked, startled. "What are you saying?" Alara laughed, a low, bitter sound that didn't belong to her. "You think love makes you special. But maybe he just pities you. Maybe he'd choose differently if he had the chance." The words hit like a whip crack, but Mira said nothing. She simply turned away, her voice soft. "You've been away too long, Alara. You don't know what we've been through." Alara's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "No," she whispered. "But I will." Then she left, her figure vanishing into the dark hallway. Mira stood there, chilled despite the warm air. Something in her sister's voice, that trembling edge between envy and madness, left her uneasy. That night, when the storm finally came, Mira couldn't sleep. Lightning flashed across the plains, thunder rolling over the hills. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw a horse moving near the barn, a lone figure leading it by the reins. For a moment, she thought it was Talon, but then lightning lit the sky again, and she realized it was Alara saddling one of the ranch horses, her cloak drawn tight. Where was she going? Mira's breath caught as a single, terrible thought struck her. Talon's camp was 5 miles east by the river, and Alara was heading that way. The storm swallowed the sound of the horses' hooves, leaving only the rustle of cottonwoods and the distant whisper of thunder, like the land itself was warning her. The storm had swallowed the plains whole. Wind howled through the canyons like a wounded spirit, and rain lashed the earth in hard, stinging sheets. Mira Weller gripped the reins of her horse, her shawl whipping behind her as she rode into the darkness. Lightning carved the sky in jagged veins, lighting up the lonely trail that led toward the river. Every crack of thunder echoed the pounding of her heart. Ilara's tracks were faint, already half washed away by the rain, but Mira didn't need them. She knew her sister well enough to feel where she'd gone, straight toward Talon's camp. The image of Ilara's pale, determined face haunted her. The words she had spoken earlier, maybe he'd choose differently if he had the chance, rang in Mira's ears like a curse. She pushed the horse harder. Mud splashed against her boots, and cold rain blinded her eyes, but she didn't stop. The land ahead stretched into a ghostly blur of shadows and lightning. Somewhere out there, between the trembling cottonwoods and the roaring river, her sister was riding toward something reckless, something dangerous. By the time she reached the edge of the river basin, the storm had quieted to a low growl. Mist rose from the earth, turning the world silver and ghost-like. Mira dismounted, her boots sinking into the soaked ground. She could smell smoke, faint but distinct, and she followed it until she saw the faint flicker of a campfire through the trees. Talon. He stood beneath the rain-darkened pines, his body glistening with moisture, his long black hair plastered against his shoulders. Even in the dim light, he looked like something carved from stone and spirit, powerful, silent, watching the night as though it whispered to him. But he wasn't alone. Ilara stood across from him, her cloak clinging to her frame, her hair wild and wet. She looked small and trembling in the downpour, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "Talon," she was saying, her voice nearly drowned by the rain. "You don't have to marry her. You could come with me, away from this cursed place. You don't belong to her." Talon didn't move. His face was unreadable, his voice calm and deep. "You are Myra's sister." "I will not listen to this." Ilara took a step closer, desperation flaring in her tone. "You will listen. You think she understands you? You think she knows what it's like to live between two worlds, unwanted by both?" Her hand reached out, trembling. "I do, Talon. I see you." "She never will." Mira froze at the edge of the clearing, hidden by the trees. The sound of her sister's voice, that mix of pain and longing, twisted her heart. Talon shook his head slowly. "Your heart speaks from envy, not love. Go back to your sister. The path you walk will only bring sorrow." Ilara's face crumpled. Her voice broke. "Then she have to lose what I can't have." Before Myra could move, Ilara's hand flashed. Steel caught the firelight, a small knife trembling in her grasp. Talon stepped back instinctively, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" But Ilara wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring past him, straight toward the trees where Myra stood frozen. "You followed me," she whispered, rain running down her face like tears. Mira stepped into the clearing, her voice shaking. "Ilara, put it down, please." Ilara's breath came in ragged gasps. "You have everything, Mira. Father's love, the ranch, the respect of everyone in town. And now him." Her voice broke into a sob. "Why can't I have something for once?" Mira took a slow step forward. "Because love doesn't grow from envy, sister. It burns everything it touches." For a heartbeat, there was silence, the kind that feels like the land itself is holding its breath. Then Ilara lunged. Mira barely saw the motion, only felt the sudden cold rush of terror as Talon moved faster than sight. His hand caught Ilara's wrist, twisting the knife from her grasp. The blade clattered into the mud. Ilara cried out, falling to her knees, her hair hanging over her face. Rain poured harder again, washing the tears from her cheeks. Mira rushed forward, but Talon stopped her with a quiet hand. Let her be, he said softly. The storm must break inside her before the land can heal. Myra's heart ached as she looked down at her sister, trembling, broken, lost. And as thunder rolled once more across the mountains, Mira knew that what had been wounded between them could not be mended easily. But she also knew this wasn't over. Ilara's eyes, when she lifted them again, no longer held sorrow. They held something far colder, something that whispered, "Next time I won't miss." The storm broke before dawn, leaving the world drenched and eerily quiet. The smell of wet earth clung to everything, and the once raging wind had fallen to a hollow whisper. Mira Weller sat at the kitchen table, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside her. She hadn't slept. Not after what happened by the river. Ilara had returned to the ranch just before sunrise, silent and soaked to the bone. She had gone straight to her room without a word. Talon had ridden beside Mira the whole way back, saying little, though his eyes had been sharp with worry. Now with the sky slowly lightening to gray, Mira waited. She could hear the faint creak of the floorboards above, Ilara moving about, restless as a trapped bird. When the footsteps finally descended the stairs, Mira lifted her head. Ilara stood in the doorway, her hair combed but still tangled at the ends, her pale face blotched from sleeplessness. The knife incident had left her shaken, though pride masked it well. "Morning," Mira said quietly. Ilara didn't answer. She poured herself coffee, her hands steady but her eyes unfocused. After a moment, she spoke. "I'm leaving town." Myra blinked. "Leaving?" Ilara nodded, not looking up. "Silver Creek needs a new seamstress. They offered me a place last month. I should have gone then." "You're running away," Mira said softly. Ilara's lips tightened. "Maybe I am, but it's better than staying here watching you live a life I'll never have." Mira rose from her chair and crossed the small room. "You don't have to do this. You can still." Ilara stepped back, her voice sharp. "Don't preach forgiveness, Mira. You think because you pity me, it makes you kind. But it doesn't. It just makes you blind." The words stung, but Mira didn't flinch. She saw the pain beneath the anger, the wounded pride of a younger sister who had always lived in someone else's shadow. "Ilara," Myra whispered, "I never wanted to take anything from you." Ilara's eyes shimmered, though her jaw remained set. "You didn't have to want it. It just happens. Everything I touch turns cold when you're near." Then she turned and walked out the door, her cloak snapping in the morning wind. Mira stood there long after she was gone, the silence of the house pressing around her. Outside, Talon waited by his horse. He had been watching from the corral, his dark hair glinting faintly in the pale dawn. Mira stepped onto the porch, her voice barely carrying. "She's leaving," she said. Talon's eyes narrowed slightly. "The storm inside her is not done. Leaving will not quiet it." Mira's throat tightened. "Then what can I do?" He turned toward the horizon, where the clouds were breaking into bands of light. "Some hearts must fall before they rise again. You can't stop her from breaking herself." Mira looked down, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. "She tried to hurt me, Talon. I saw it in her eyes. She'd have done it if you hadn't stopped her." Talon stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "You have a gentle soul, Myra, but even gentle souls must learn when to guard their hearts." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the wind rustling through the damp fields, the world smelling of rain and regret. By afternoon, Ilara was gone. She left no letter, no word of where she'd ride first, only the faint outline of her horse's tracks leading toward the southern hills. Days passed. The ranch grew quiet again, though the unease never left Myra's chest. At night, she would dream of her sister standing in the rain, eyes burning, whispering things the wind carried away. Talon tried to bring peace, tending the horses, mending fences, sitting beside her as the sun went down, but the shadow of that night never truly left them. One evening, as they sat by the porch, Talon's gaze drifted toward the distant ridge. "She watches us still," he murmured. Mayra frowned. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward the hills. "I've seen smoke near the old canyon twice this week. She hasn't gone far." Mira's stomach turned cold. Why would she stay so close? Talon's expression darkened. "Because the storm isn't over." A chill swept through her as she realized the truth. Alara hadn't gone to start a new life. She had gone to plan something. Something she couldn't do while under the same roof. And when she returned, the next storm wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from her. By the end of the week, the plains had turned quiet again, but that quiet was not peace. It was the kind that hides something waiting to strike. Mayra Weller woke before sunrise, the ranch still blanketed in half-light. A low mist drifted through the corral, softening the edges of the world. She stepped onto the porch with a lantern, her boots thudding softly on the wood. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry fading into the stillness. She felt it again, that weight in her chest. A presence she couldn't name. Talon had gone to the northern ridge at dawn to check the fences. Before leaving, he had looked back at her and said, "If the land feels uneasy, trust it. The earth speaks when danger walks." Now, as she looked across the valley, she saw it, a thin trail of smoke rising from beyond the ridge, the direction Talon had gone. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't the kind of smoke from a campfire. It was darker, angrier. She rushed back inside and threw on her coat, snatching her father's old rifle from the wall. The ride to Black Hollow took nearly an hour. The storm's leftover puddles splashed under the hooves of her horse, and the morning wind carried the smell of charred wood. When she finally crested the hill, her heart nearly stopped. The fence near the northern pasture was torn down, and the grass around it was scorched. The remains of a fire smoldered near the hollow's edge. But worse, Talon's horse stood alone, reins dragging, its coat streaked with soot. Mira slid from her saddle, her hands trembling. "Talon!" she called. Her voice echoed through the hollow. A moment later, she heard it, a faint groan. She ran toward the sound and found him slumped against a fallen tree, his bare chest streaked with blood and ash. His long black hair clung to his face, and his tribal necklaces were broken, beads scattered across the dirt. "Talon!" She dropped beside him, her breath shaking. He looked up, eyes half-lidded. "They came. When I reached the ridge." "Who?" she whispered. He coughed, pressing a hand against his ribs. "2 men. Hired. Said someone paid them to warn the Apache to leave town." His jaw clenched. "But they weren't after me, Mira. They said your name." Mira's heart stopped. "My name?" He nodded slowly. "They thought I'd be alone. But someone wanted to send fear into your heart." Her breath came shallow. "Alara." The name hung between them like poison. Talon's eyes darkened. She was near. "I saw her horse beyond the rocks before they attacked. She didn't come closer. Only watched." Mira rose, anger burning through her fear. "She set this up. She wanted to hurt me, through you." Talon grabbed her wrist weakly. "No. If you chase her now, you'll walk into what she's planned. She's not the same woman who left, Mira. She carries something heavier now." Mira shook her head, her eyes wet. "I can't just sit here and wait for her to strike again." He met her gaze, steady despite his wounds. "Then promise me one thing, you won't let hate guide your hand." Her voice broke. "She tried to kill me, Talon. How much more do I forgive?" He winced but managed a faint smile. "Forgiveness isn't for her. It's to keep your soul from becoming like hers." For a long moment, Mira said nothing. She only watched the man she loved, strong even in pain, and felt the cruel twist of fate that had set sister against sister. By evening, she helped him back to the ranch, binding his wounds with bandages and silence. The lantern light flickered over his bronze skin, over the marks of battle. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the cottonwoods. As she closed the window shutters, a glint caught her eye, something wedged under the porch rail. She bent to look. It was a silver hairpin, one she recognized instantly. Elara's. A note was tied around it with red thread. Mira's fingers trembled as she untied it. The paper held just 5 words. You took him. I'll finish it. Her breath hitched, and she looked toward the distant hills where the last of the daylight bled away. The smoke had vanished, but its warning lingered. Elara wasn't gone. She was watching, waiting for night to fall again. The night fell heavy over Sage Hollow, the moon veiled behind clouds like a secret too dark to show its face. The ranch house sat in uneasy silence, every board creaking with the whisper of wind. Inside, Mira Weller moved from room to room, lighting the old brass lanterns her father had once hung. The warm glow flickered across the wooden walls, but it couldn't chase away the feeling that someone was watching. Talon slept fitfully in the back room, his bandaged ribs rising and falling beneath a rough wool blanket. Mira had spent the day tending to him, changing his dressings, listening to his soft words of reassurance, words meant for her peace, not his. But every time he closed his eyes, she saw that note again. You took him. I'll finish it. Her sister's handwriting, elegant but edged with hate, was burned into her mind. She tried to calm her breathing. The horses had been restless all evening. Twice she'd gone out to the barn to quiet them, but both times she'd felt it, the prickling sense of eyes following her from the shadows of the cottonwoods. It wasn't just nerves. Elara was out there. Mira knew it. She set another lantern by the window, its flame trembling against the glass. The flicker cast long, shifting shadows that reached across the porch like fingers. Behind her, a voice came low and steady. You shouldn't stay by the windows. She turned. Talon stood in the doorway, shirtless, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His dark eyes were half lit by the flame, his face carved in quiet determination. You should be resting, Mira said softly. He shook his head. Rest doesn't stop a knife. Mira wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. Elara had grown unpredictable, jealous, wounded, and dangerous. Talon moved closer, his hand brushing her shoulder. She will come tonight. The wind carries her scent. Fear drives her now. Mira shivered. Then let her come. I won't hide in my own home. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then we wait. They extinguished all but one lantern and sat together in the dim light. The storm from the previous night had left the ground soft, and through the open window came the distant creak of branches and the drip of rainwater from the eaves. Hours passed. The air thickened with the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. Then a sound. A horse's distant snort. A soft clink of metal. Mira froze. Talon rose silently, his movements fluid despite his injury. He reached for his hunting knife on the table, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Through the faint lantern glow, Mira saw movement near the barn, a shadow, swift and deliberate. Elara, she whispered. Talon placed a finger to her lips. Stay. Before she could stop him, he slipped through the side door, vanishing into the darkness. Mira waited only seconds before she followed. The wind tugged at her dress as she crossed the yard, the lantern in her hand swinging wildly. The barn loomed ahead, a black shape against the pale sky. She heard a struggle, a low grunt, and then silence. Talon! She called, her voice breaking. She ran inside. The lantern light revealed chaos, a knocked-over pail, hay scattered across the floor, and Talon standing near the stall door, breathing hard, holding someone by the wrist. Ilara. Her sister's face was pale, streaked with dirt, eyes wide and wild. In her hand, she gripped a small pistol, trembling between her fingers. Talon had twisted her arm, forcing the barrel away. "Let go of me," Ilara hissed. Mira stepped forward, voice trembling. "Ilara, stop this before it's too late." Ilara's eyes flicked to her sister, filled with rage and tears. "You think you can talk me down again? You think love makes you untouchable?" She jerked free from Talon, stumbling back. The gun wavered in her grasp. Talon stepped between them. "You don't want to do this." Ilara's voice cracked. "You don't know what I want." For a moment, the world held still. Then thunder rolled again, not from the sky, but from the gun. The shot echoed through the barn. Mira gasped, lantern falling from her hand as light spilled across the dirt floor. Ilara froze, staring at the smoking pistol. Talon stood motionless for a heartbeat before collapsing forward, his body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Mira screamed, running to him. Blood spread slowly beneath his chest, dark against his bronze skin. Ilara backed away, horror dawning on her face. "No. I didn't mean," but her words broke apart as she fled into the night, vanishing into the storm-wet darkness. Mira cradled Talon's head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. His eyes fluttered open. "The storm's not done," he whispered. "But neither are we." Then his breath grew shallow. Outside, the wind howled like the cry of something ancient and wounded, carrying both warning and grief. The night stretched long and heavy, hanging over the canyon like a judgment that would not fall. A faint wind carried the scent of burnt wood and iron blood. The stars, usually bright and sharp over the Arizona plains, hid tonight behind the storm clouds, as though even they refused to witness what was to come. Marisol stood at the edge of the ridge, her breath ragged, the cold seeping into her bones. Below, the faint orange glow of the campfire flickered, a small, fragile light fighting the blackness. Her sister Lila stood beside it, her cloak spread wide like a raven's wings. Between them was Chenoa, the man both women loved. He knelt now, his hands bound loosely, his dark hair falling into his face. Even in the dim light, the power in his form was unmistakable, the strong lines of his shoulders, the carved muscles of his chest glistening with blood and moonlight. His turquoise and bone necklace, broken in the struggle, hung in tatters around his neck. Lila's voice carried up through the canyon, soft and venomous. "You think he chose you because of love, Marisol? You, with your quiet prayers and your proper manners? He chose you because you were safe. He pities you." Marisol swallowed hard. The wind stung her eyes, but it was not the wind that made them water. "No, Lila," she whispered. "He chose me because I saw his heart before I saw his face. You saw only the power." Lila laughed, but the sound cracked in her throat. "You always thought you were better than me. Always the dutiful one, always the admired one. Even Father saw you as his golden child. But not anymore." Her hand moved fast, the silver dagger glinting in the firelight. Marisol froze, her heart screaming though her body would not move. But Chenoa did. In one fierce motion, he lunged upward, the rope snapping against his wrists as though it were paper. His hand caught Lila's wrist just as the blade arced toward him. The dagger cut deep into his palm, and the fire hissed when his blood struck it. "Stop!" he roared, his voice echoing through the canyon like thunder. "You spill this blood and it will never wash clean." Lila's eyes burned with something wild, a mix of heartbreak and madness. She fought against his grip, her breath ragged and desperate. "I loved you. I waited for you when no one else would. You belong to me." Chenoa's jaw clenched. "I never belonged to anyone," he said, his tone low and calm, like the deep rumble before a storm breaks. Marisol finally moved, scrambling down the rocky slope toward them. Her skirt tore on sharp stones, her knees bleeding, but she did not stop until she reached them. She caught her sister's other arm, trying to pull her back. "Lila, please. This isn't who you are." But Lila turned her head sharply, eyes glinting with tears and fury. "You stole everything from me, Marisol." "You always have." In the struggle, the dagger slipped. It fell, gleaming once in the firelight before vanishing into the dark sand below. For a heartbeat, silence filled the canyon. Only the crackle of the fire and the heavy breathing of 3 broken souls remained. Then Lila collapsed to her knees. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, her fury crumbling into grief. Chenoa released her wrist slowly, his face lined with pain, not from his wound, but from what had been lost between them all. Marisol knelt beside her sister, placing a trembling hand on her back. "It's over, Lila," she whispered. "It doesn't have to end in hate." Lila's voice came out small, choked. "He'll never forgive me." Marisol's eyes flickered toward Chenoa, who stood silent, his hand wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his own sash. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," he said, "but peace that we can still choose." The wind swept through then, soft but cold, carrying away the smoke and the last echoes of violence. The sisters sat together, faces lit by dying firelight, and the Apache warrior stood over them, tall and solemn beneath the rising moon, a guardian, a witness, a man who had loved, lost, and still stood unbroken. But deep within the canyon shadows, something darker stirred, not hatred, but consequence. The past had not yet released them, and before dawn, they would all have to face it. Dawn came slow and pale, creeping through the canyon like a tired ghost. The storm had passed, leaving behind a land washed clean but heavy with silence. The ashes of last night's fire smoldered softly, a thin gray smoke rising like a prayer that had no words left. Marisol sat by the dying embers, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The bruises on her arms had already begun to fade, but the pain behind her eyes would not. Beside her, Lila lay on a bed of woven blankets, her face pale, her breath shallow but steady. The dagger's fall had ended the violence, but it had also cut something far deeper, a bond between sisters that could never fully heal. Chenoa stood a few feet away, his broad frame still and solemn against the rising sun. His long black hair shimmered in the light, a curtain of shadow streaked with silver. The turquoise beads of his broken necklace had been rethreaded, uneven but whole again, a symbol of something mended, though never as it once was. He turned his gaze toward Marisol. "She will live," he said quietly. His voice carried the roughness of sleepless nights and too many unspoken sorrows. Marisol nodded, staring into the embers. But will she ever forgive herself? Chenoa walked closer, the sand soft under his bare feet. "Forgiveness is a long road," he murmured. "For her? And for you?" She looked up at him then, the light catching in her tear-filled eyes. "For me? You still carry her wound as if it were your own," he said. "You can't heal her by bleeding with her." Marisol's lips trembled, but she said nothing. The truth in his words cut deeper than any blade. Lila stirred, a low groan escaping her lips. Marisol hurried to her side, brushing the younger woman's hair from her face. When Lila's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouded them. "Marisol?" "I'm here," Marisol whispered, her voice breaking. Lila's gaze darted to Chenoa, standing in the golden light beyond them. Shame flickered across her features. "I hurt him," she whispered weakly. I wanted to. Marisol shook her head, tears spilling freely now. No more, Lila. What's done is done. You're safe. Lila's lips quivered. He'll never look at me again. Chenoa knelt beside them, his deep brown eyes calm, almost mournful. Lila, he said softly, I saw your heart long before the hatred came. You were lost in your pain. That doesn't make you beyond redemption. Her eyes filled with tears, but she turned away. I wanted to be loved. That's all. I didn't know how else to reach for it. Marisol took her sister's hand gently. You will learn, little one. We both will. For a long time, none of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the canyon grass, carrying the scent of sage and rain. The desert had been cruel, but it was also honest. It stripped everything bare, leaving only truth behind. When the sun finally crested over the ridgeline, Chenoa rose to his feet. He looked out across the valley, his people's land, stretching wide and gold beneath the morning light. His face was calm, but in his eyes burned something deeper than peace, the weight of choice. Marisol stood beside him. You'll return to your tribe, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. There is much to mend. They have waited for me. She swallowed hard, the ache in her chest nearly unbearable. And what of us? Chenoa turned to her then, his gaze steady and warm. The river always meets the sea, Marisol. Sometimes the path is long, but the water finds its way. Her breath caught, a faint smile breaking through the tears. You always speak in riddles. He smiled faintly. No, in truth. He reached up, taking the rethreaded necklace from around his neck. The turquoise beads glimmered softly in the sun. He placed it in her palm. This carries the spirit of two hearts that have walked through fire, he said. One of blood, and one of love. Keep it close so you never forget either. She closed her fingers around it, her heart trembling. Will I see you again? Chenoa looked toward the horizon. If the wind wills it. Then, with the grace of a man born of both earth and spirit, he mounted his horse and rode toward the eastern plains. His silhouette grew smaller against the blazing sky until it became one with the land itself. Marisol watched until he was gone, her sister's quiet sobs the only sound behind her. The canyon felt empty without him, and yet, in that emptiness, there was peace. The fire had burned everything it could. What remained now were ashes, and the promise that something new could rise from them. And as the wind swept through the canyon one last time, Marisol whispered into the light, Go well, my Apache.